All right, we're back. We are Comp 1004, Rapid Application Development in the winter 2017 semester here at Georgian, week 13, part 2 of our broadcast for Unity 2D and Visual Studio. What do we do? How do we make little games? Should we do it one way or should we do it another way? When you make games, to me, it makes sense to use Unity, but we're making the simple example, what we did with Visual Studio. For what we did, we could probably make it work. Again, it'll test out some of your advanced control management skills and so on, and kind of review the things that we learned this semester, not including file handling and database, which we did in one assignment. So let's close this down. So I'm not going to use Visual Studio now, and I'm just going to maximize my my memory. I'm going to suspend my VM, right? Because now I'm going to go into Unity. I'm going to bring up Unity at the same time while this thing is being suspended. Over the break, over last week to this week, I did upgrade to 5.6, right? But not, like I said, it doesn't really make a difference. I've got a new Unity project that I ran last week, and here's the lesson 12. I'm just going to make another one this week, right? I'm not going to continue the old one. Let's make a new Unity project. We're going to call it COMP1004, winter 2017, lesson 13, right? And we're going to click 2D this time. I don't care about analytics. I'm going to turn that off and click create project. Now, for those people who are doing Unity, I highly recommend you do it with me because it's one less thing to do when you're not here, right? And meanwhile, I'm going to close off my VM just to maximize my memory capabilities. I'm still going to use that black sword. See that black sword right there? There's a reason for that. So I'm bringing it in, right? Just to show you the insanity, right? Okay, cool. So here's my new project, right? Notice that it defaulted to the last settings I had in. So it said mobile 320 by 480. It kept my proportions, right? It also kept my last layout, even though this is a whole new project, right? So that's kind of a good thing and a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. In the beginning, I don't care about this. All I care about is this, right? So I'm just going to hide my game by putting it next to it in the same tab. There we go. So I see my scene view. This is what I want right now. Okay. Notice, how did I organize my projects last time? What did I do? What folders did I create? Who remembers? Scripts. So new folder, scripts. And I use an underscore, right? Because I want it to come at the top. So scripts. Okay. And what else? Scenes, that's a good one to start off with, right? And then probably some kind of thing like textures or materials or whatever. So we'll say textures. Again, textures are images. You can call them that as well. And I also want to add a new one called prefabs. So I'm going to make a new folder called prefabs. I want you to think about it as fabricated objects that I'm going to create that I can instantiate over and over again. I'm going to save my scene. So I'm going to click Control or Command S, which is going to save my scene. I got to pick my scenes folder, and inside here, call it main. Right? You can call it whatever you like. I'm just going to call it the main scene. If you have multiple scenes, if you have a menu scene, you would call it menu. If you had a game over scene, you call it game over. Right? Here's my scene. And what I want to do is I want some assets. So I'm going to go to my desktop where I have my black sword. Here it is, my black sword on my desktop. I'm gonna kind of put it into my project by dragging and dropping it into my folder. There's my black sword. Yay! And if I bring it on the screen, my black sword is here. Right? Wow, that was fast. Right? Unity's like that. Right? It drags and drops up. So what have I done really? If you look at this, my hierarchy, which is over here, right? Anything in my hierarchy when my game starts is automatically instantiated into my scene. It's actually an object that gets created. Anything that's inside my hierarchy. There's two objects in my hierarchy right now. One, which is a main camera, which is looking at this thing in orthographic view. Again, we talked about the views, projection view as opposed to orthographic. Orthographic looks at this thing as it's flat. Best way of looking at things in 2D, looking at it as flat, right? Now, if I want to modify my object, and you can see that this object here is an image, right? It has boundaries. I have two parts, my components. There's two components. One, the transform component, which is location, rotation, and scale. right? That's what this thing does, as well as my sprite renderer, which draws out my image, right? That's what these things do. I can also flip things, right? By clicking flip vertically as well as horizontally. If I want to do that, there's a little control to do that over here. And notice that it is simple draw mode. I can also call it sliced, right, or tiled. I don't care about these right now. All I care about my draw mode is simple, right? And my sorting layer is default, right? I can also add a sorting layer. My order and layer matters because order and layer signifies what's the arrangement of my layers. If I have more than one image here, one will be layered on top of another. I want to do the same thing as I did last time. I want to make this thing a little bit smaller so I can work on mobile now. So I want to reduce the size of this thing. I'm going to use my eye to do that. So I'm going to take this thing, reduce it a little bit so I can see what I like to see it in. I'm going to kind of what that size is, right? And if I look over here on the right, you can see, and it's hard to see because of my settings, my font settings, but on the right you can see the scale is 0.32, 0.32. Let's just make it 0.3, so 0.3 just to make it right. And if you can see automatically on the left, it changes exactly. So 0.3 is roughly just less than 1/3 of the size of what it was before, right? Notice the Z, even though I changed it, there's no depth to this thing. We talked about this before. This is just a plane right now. And when I look at this in 2D, you can see that that's the case, right? Here's my object in 2D, right? It's actually in three-dimensional space. It's a 2D object, right? That has no width at all. There's no depth to this object whatsoever, right? But from a camera perspective, it appears to be flat on my screen, okay? Now, I want this thing to move up and down, and I need a little bit of a script for it. Whenever we want to control any object, we need to attach a script, okay? In this particular case, I want to attach a script to this thing, which is my black sword, okay? So how do I do that? Well, what I like to do is go into my scripts folder and add a new script, a new C# script. And I'm going to call this the black sword script, or black sword controller, which is what I like to call it. Here's my black sword controller. Now, it's not attached. This is just a script that's just sitting there. In order for me to make this script work or do something with my black sword with this script, I need to attach the script as a component to my black sword. So notice that my black sword itself still has only two components, transform, well, it's actually three, but transform and the sprites renderer. But my black sword script is sitting in my script folder, and it doesn't seem to be attached because it isn't. I can do that by dragging and dropping my black scripts controller script onto this thing. And when I do that, it actually adds it in to my black sword object as another component. So you can see now I have a scripts component. So there's three components: my transform, location, rotation, and scale, right? My sprite render, which draws out my sword, right? And my black sword controller script. That's what it is, okay? I'm going to double click my black sword controller script. Now, if you're using Windows, it will by default take you into Visual Studio, but I'm going to be using MonoDevelop because MonoDevelop is the default text editor or code editor for Unity, and it works cross-platform. I'm using a Mac. Notice that I'm using my Mac on the metal. I'm not using Unity inside a VM. That would be very bad. All right, don't try and use Unity in a VM. That would be just horrendous. Do it right on the metal, right? Okay, cool. Take a look. I got two methods like we taught. This is a review from last time. I got my start method and my update method. My update method, I want you to think about this as triggering every frame. That means every 16 milliseconds. We just covered this. Every 16 milliseconds or so, this update method will trigger. It'll keep on triggering every 16 milliseconds. So any animation I want to do in the update method. There are three types of updates. I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again from last time. There is an update. There is fixed update. There is late update. Those are all methods that are built into the Unity lifecycle. Okay, that's what it is. Fixed update is used for physics effects. If I want something to fall or jump or act like a platformer, that kind of physics, have any kind of spring type effect or whatever, all with fixed update. Any normal update, something that I want to do, I want to move something around the screen that's not physics related, I want to use update. And late update we use for other special effects. Okay? So there's the two you really have to know are update and fixed update. And how do you remember that fixed update refers to physics? They both sound like an F. Fixed update physics, right? And that's the great mnemonic for that. Okay? Updates. So what I want to do is I want to change the location of my object, right? I want to change the location of my object in space, in two-dimensional space, every frame. And I want to do that here. Now, I know that I have a position for my game object. So I could say something like this. This game object. I'm referring to the game object that's attached to that the script is attached to. All right. The script right now is attached to a game object. I'm saying this game object, the game object that this thing is attached to. All right. Dot position. Right. Now, if I look at this and I say, okay, my game object, what can I do? Can I do dot position? If I can't, it's going to turn red. Right. If I can, it'll turn black. Right. Is equal to a new, notice how it turns red, right? And I'll tell you why, right? A lot of times what we have to do is get a reference to the game object itself, the position. And you can expose different things that you want to have access to. For example, I want to have the main component, by the way, for the position is transform, right? Let me take a look at it. So if I go to my black sword, notice that it's transform and then position. Position is a sub-property of the transform component. So therefore, if I have to go back to my code, trying to do position by itself, right, makes no sense. You should do transform.position. And there, now it comes up, transform.position, right? So game object is the game object, transform is the component, position is the actual location in two-dimensional space with X and Y coordinates. I want to create a new position, right? And I'm going to use something called a vector 2. We'll use a vector 2 object. A vector 2 object. Vector 2 objects take X and Y coordinates. We don't care about the Z because Z's not going to change, right? So vector 2 takes two floats, two floating point numbers, right? One for X and one for Y, okay? So now remember, it's going to start by default on the upper left-hand corner of the screen. The anchor for this, for each of the objects, is again the top left corner of the screen. So for now, we're just going to make it so it's 0.0f and 0.0f, right? So we're going to say every update, we're going to just reset this thing for now, just to set this up for once and for all. We're going to see if this works too. In other words, every update is going to move back to the corner, right? Right? Now, right now, just to test this, I'm going to grab this and move it over here, right? So if it works, it's going to go right to the corner. Let's see that happen. So I'm going to press play, and then, oh man, what happened? How come it didn't move into the top left corner? What really happened here? Well, look, this stuff is 0, 0, 0, position 0, 0, 0, right? That's position 0, 0. But I expected it to be way over here. How come it's not positioning properly? What's really happening here? That's really loud. Well, if I reset this thing to 0, 0, 0, whoa, that's not what I wanted. Undo. If I reset the position to 0, 0, 0, it is a 0, 0, 0 right now. Look, here's my rotation. Here's my position. Here's 0, 0, 0. Why is it going there? That's 0, 0, 0. Anybody have an idea? Because this world, all right, is not positioned at the top left corner of the screen. This world, the 0, 0, 0 mark is positioned in the middle of your viewport. Okay, if you want the 0, 0, 0 mark to be positioned up here, you have to tell it to do so. Okay? So, and there's various tricks in order for you to do that. Right now, also, our camera is really taking care of all that, right? Notice that the viewport rect is 0, 0, and then 1, 1, right? The viewport rect is basically telling you how wide the viewport is, this camera is, relative to the size of my screen, right? So width and height, if I make these, and again, these are normalized values. That means normalized values means it goes from 0 to 1, right? 1 being 100%, 0 being 0%, okay? So if I was to say that the width of my viewport, my camera, is half the width of the screen, I can just go 0.5. And you can see now that my camera is half as wide as it was before, right? And if I say that the height of my screen is 0.5, again, you can see that it's proportionate, right? But when I run this thing, you're going to see that it's going to be at the top left, the bottom left corner of my screen. So one part of my entire screen, right? This is the viewport rect. So the viewport rect is normalized values, right? Normalized device coordinates, that's what they are, between 0 and 1, okay? And this is telling you the x and y coordinates. X and y coordinates are 0, 0. From the viewport perspective, that's top left. And if I was to change this, so let's make it so 0.5 and 0.5, like I did before, right? And now these are normalized values. I want to move this up to 0.5. Let's see what happens if I do this, 0.5, and I run this thing. What do I get, first of all, from a gain perspective? There's 0.5. Take a look. And if I move this up to 0.5, where's this going to go? Right? It goes up there. So normalized device coordinates, we have to understand how those work, right? It moves from 0 to 1, right? And in this case, it's going from -1 to +1. That's what's really happening. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So if I move these values back to 0 and 0, so 0 and 0, right? And this goes back to 1 and 1, you can see that the screen size will change depending on my camera. Now this is great. If I want to have multiple cameras in the scene, for example, if I want to make couch co-op, right? I can have multiple cameras and they can take different parts of my screen. They can project onto my image, onto my viewport at different coordinates. So again, this whole idea of couch co-op, split screen is what we're talking about, right? But in this case, this is not what we want to do. So that's what this does, my camera itself. So, okay, that's cool. So here's my black sword. So how do I figure out the, my values? So if I go 0, 0, what would be, as an example, -5? Whoa, what's gone? Like, how come it's gone? Because if I look at my scene, -5 is way out here, right? Let's just turn that off. People are normally people don't email me that crazily, but today for whatever reason, it's just happening. All right, so notice that -5 is way out here. And if I go +5, just to give you an idea, +5 is way over here, right? So what's my range? How do I know what my range is? Well, you can test this out if I click this little button up here or use the W key. And if I drag these control handles, I can see that the maximum range my object can go, right, from a ranging perspective is approximately 2.32 on the y-axis. Remember, this is normalized coordinate space, right? With a maximum length on the left of -234, or whatever it is, -232 to 232. Now you're in your mind, you're like, that doesn't make any sense. What the hell is 232? The answer is, don't worry about it. Why would you worry? If I was going to do a picture-perfect game, pixel perfect, right? Absolute positioning, okay, then I would change this around and it wouldn't look like this, right? But I'm not doing a pixel perfect game. I'm doing a game that can morph and that can be displayed on multiple screen sizes, right? Maybe it'll work on an Android device or an iOS device or some kind of tablet or whatever, right? So I want my screen sizes to be normalized, proportionate, and it's going to translate everything when I deploy to a particular device. Now this idea is important because if you drag and drop an image here that you make it relative to the screen size, it's going to change size, right? Relative to your screen size, which is not what you want, okay? Okay, but now I want to move this thing up and down the screen, and I know that it's going to start off at 0, 0, 0, right? What about if I want it to start at the top? So if I move this up to the top, notice where the position of my handle indicates the pivot point of my object, okay? So if I move it to the top, notice that it is at the top left corner, so -234, just like we did before. And if I go all the way to the bottom, just to kind of give you guys an idea of what the bottom is, all the way to the bottom, you can see that it's -375, and the top one is approximately 375 or 364. There we go. So 369, and let's try it again. To approximately 375 because of the shape of my object. Okay, so that's really what the x and y coordinates, the limit of my x and y coordinates are when I want to try and do this change, right? Now here's a challenge. How do I know proportionally how much I want to move stuff, right? Because now I'm just moving it like, by relative sizes. Is it 0.1? Is it 0.2? What does 0.1 and 0.2 do? Well, we can test that. So let's move it 0.1 0.1 from a normalized device coordinates perspective down the screen every frame. Okay, let's see what that does. So how do you do that in code? So first of all, if I'm going to go back to my code, it starts off at 0.0. Well, starting means I got to put this in my start method. So I'm going to cut this out here and put it in my start. So when I start, my object starts in the middle every time, right? But then every update, what I want to say is this. I want to say the, and again, I can use my var keyword, new location, just like we did before, right? New location is equal to, and this is the new location on the y-axis, because that's all I care about right now, is equal to a vector2 object or a y coordinate. We're going to say it's going to be equal to 0.1. So whatever the old location is, so this game object dot transform dot position dot y. I can read from y, but I can't write to it, just like I could before, right? Plus 0.1. Okay, that's what the new location is. And then what I want to do is I want to say this dot game object dot transform dot position, right, is equal to a new vector2 object, which is going to be on the x coordinate. We're going to say 0.0. So we're going to keep it in the middle. But on the y, we're going to say new location. New location y. Okay. Same exact code from C#, pretty much. Except instead of a point, we have a vector2. A vector2, think about it as just, in this case, a two-dimensional point. Vector3 would be three-dimensional point. And there's also vector4 for imaginary objects, or points with imaginary numbers, right? For example, the W component. Yeah. Correct. Vector4 would have 4. Think about four floating points, 3 floating points, 2 floating points. Okay? There is no vector1. That would just be a floating point. All right, let's run this thing. See what happens, right? So I'm going to go back to my code. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Let's go back to my code and run around. Let's see what happens. So, boom. Oh, man. It says compiler options have to be fixed before you can enter play mode. What does it give me? Thank you very much. And if I go back, going to run it again, right? And I'll put my console. I want to keep my console somewhere. I'll put it up here. There we go. And let's just run it again and see what happens. Oh, man. It went up. That's what I want. I didn't want that. How come? I added 0.1 to it. And in this case, 0.1 moves it up, not down, right? If I want to move it down, it's got to be -1, right? Okay. So minus, I would put in -0.1, right? And if I want to do that now and run it, now it'll move down the screen, right, roughly at 0.1, right? So that's not bad. 0.1 is a pretty good frame rate or a movement rate. Let's take a look at a faster. So if I go 0.5, man, I'm playing with these numbers. And you know what? I want to have a way of controlling things. Whenever you program stuff, we're programmers, we're developers. We're making tools for our users. Our user in Unity might want to play with those numbers, right? So instead of you programmatically putting a hard-coded number, wouldn't it be nice if you can play around with this in real time? And the answer is you can. And to do that, you make another variable up here, public, and we're going to call this public variable, we're going to call this the max speed, right? And we're going to make this public variable of a type. The max speed is a float, right? Which we're going to initialize right at the top as 0.1f. Okay? And then down here, instead of this 0.5, I'm just going to put max speed in here. What I did? Max speed. So here's max speed. Here's max speed. I made it a public float, right? Public float, once you make something public, right, it will appear in the inspector. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So as soon as I do this, right, without any extra work, if I go back to Unity, right, over here, once we save, notice that my max speed is now a variable that appears in my inspector, right here. That means in real time, which is the best place to test it, right? I can test the speed of what this is. And if I want to, in my scene view, right? Notice that my game object went away. I can always reset this thing. Look, take a look. I can go back to 0, right? And I can keep testing that out, right? So here's my 0.1. If I want this to go way farther out, like let's say, I don't know, I want it to go to a 5, right? You can see how that works, where I change the value of it, right? And if I want to change the value of this really fast, so if I go to 0.5 and I go to 5, let's see how this looks now. You can see that that's much faster. So real time, you can make these changes. But when I stop recording, if I stop doing stuff, they go back to their original numbers. So real-time testing is amazing with Unity because I can test my numbers, but I got to give myself a chance to do that by putting numbers in the inspector. Now, I think 5 might be too fast, 0.5. Or maybe 0.2 is okay. So I can modify it here in my inspector and try it again. Right? That's pretty good. Okay, that speed. I like that speed. Okay? 0.2. Now you might like a higher speed or whatever. It's fine. Okay, I want to do that looping trick. Right? So I want to kind of make it so that, first of all, it doesn't start here. I want it to start off screen, like up here. Well, this is perfect. Do this for yourself. Put it off screen. And then you can see that in my reset function, that it's got to be at least 6.28 off the screen. So this is my y coordinate, 6.28. Hey, let's round it off and make it 6.3. That's where I want it to start. So 6.3 is the place where it's going to reset. That's where my sword is going to appear off screen. Okay, cool. Let's do that. So I'm going to make a reset function. You can make it public or private. And here I'm going to make it private. Remember, even though we're doing C#, this is just using C# as a script language for the API, all right? So my private method that I'm going to be using here is going to be called _reset, just like we did before, right? It's going to also return void. I need to specify that as well. And then in my public reset method, what I wanted to do is exactly what I said, which is this .gameObject .transform .position. By the way, there's a way faster way of doing this, which is a new vector2 object. And then the default for the x coordinate, we'll make it 0.0f. We don't care about that. But this one will be 6.3f off screen. That's the reset position. So we don't need to do that here, right? I'm going to call the reset method from here, this ._reset, just like normal. Exactly the same code that we saw in Visual Studio. I'm trying to keep it the same so that way you know that there's not a lot of change here, right? Okay, cool. The only difference is the update is the tick function in Visual Studio, and I don't have a constructor here. I just have something called start, which initializes everything. Okay, so here's my reset method. Well, I also want to, when I reset, I want to check that I need to reset this down here. And I'm going to call this ._checkbounds. I don't have that method right now, but I'm going to put it in. I'll put it right here. So checkbounds. So this is a little different. You don't have to do it this way, but I choose to. Checkbounds. The checkbounds method, what it's going to do is it's going to check to see the position of my object, right? Oh man, hey, I'm going to hard code stuff again. It's coming. It's coming. I've already done it, right? I want to make an upper bounds and a lower bounds, right? I want to do that for this particular thing, right? But instead of hard coding it, but what if I have another object tomorrow that's something else? I want to be able to use this same script, right, on different objects, which I can, right? Instead of having one object. That means not just max speed, but also a public float. That's my upper bounds, which for now I'm gonna put in there as 6.3, and a public float lower bounds, right, which are going to be minus 6.3, because things are proportional, you know, for the most part. That means in here, instead of doing 6.3, I'm going to go to upper bounds, right? I want to include that upper bounds. Why am I doing it this way? It's modular. I can change these values at runtime, which can allow me to test and adjust things as I go. right? As opposed to always having to come back to my script. I don't want to do that. Okay, but my check bounds method is going to do the following. I'm going to say if, right, this.gameObject.transform .position .y, right, is greater than or equal to this dot lower bounds. Is it lower? Is it less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to? What do you think it is? Anybody? Well, if my lower bound is minus 6.3, it's definitely going to be less than. Right? Now, is it 6.3? Because I'm moving it 6.3 off, and then I'm resetting it, right? So if that's true, then this dot underscore reset, just like before. So I'm going to recycle that sword over and over again. And I'm going to show it to you now, how it works. Okay, let me go back to my code for my inspector. You can see now, once I've saved, if I go back to my black sword, I have two values, upper bounds and lower bounds. It actually is exposed in my inspector. So I can create my tool, right? And now I have, you know, somewhere on the inspector that I can modify it in real time if I need to. All right, let's run this thing and see what happens. So I'm going to go there, and then you should see this. Oh. Now, this is what we're actually seeing in the game, right? But what's really happening is this. Take a look. So this is the viewport, and in the scene, it's actually resetting over and over again. This is giving the illusion of something coming down, more than one sword coming down at you, right? Right now, it looks like there's one sword that keeps coming down. Whoa, swords, right? Okay, this is boring. Swords need to spin when they come at you to make it like difficult. So when you feel that you're going to die, right? So how did this happen, right? Otherwise, there's no challenge, right? So for my black sword, what I wanted to do is, in my code now, I wanted to rotate a certain amount, okay? And this is going to happen inside of my update. Regardless of what happens, I'm going to rotate my sword a certain number of degrees, right? Now, if we were going to do this manually, we have to account for things like gimbal lock, and we have to change the rotation of my object. And I don't want to do that. There's actually a helper function to help us out with all game objects called rotate. Let's try this out. So I'm going to say something like this. If I go try and do rotate, it's not going to work. How about transform? This game object transform rotate. Here's my rotate. And notice what it asks for. It's asking for a vector 3, right, where I want to rotate around, okay? I want to rotate around something, right? Now, if I only do it once, right, it's looking for angles, right? So let's take a look at these. There's a bunch of constructor options. There's one is Euler Angles. So if I kind of scroll down here, right, this one is an example of how many Euler angles I want, or Euler angles. The vector 3 axis that I want to rotate around, right? Here's an example of y angle, x angle, y angle, and z angle. So I can put floats in there instead of a new vector as well, right? Okay, cool. Well, what is the angle in? Is it in degrees? Is it in radians? We don't even know, right? This says by degrees. That's good. So the angle in degrees that it's going to happen is right now, if I go to, on my x-axis, we're looking at it straight on, right? My x-axis goes right and left, right? And my y-axis goes up and down. So I want to rotate on my z-axis, which is in the middle like this, almost like the corkscrew effect, right? So I want to say 0.0 f on my x, 0.0 f on my y, but maybe, I don't know, or maybe 5.0 f on my z. Let's see what happens there. Does it do it once? Does it keep doing it forever? What the heck does it do, right? And if we go back and we run this darn thing, we see that, right? Wow, looks like it's going to rotate forever. It's going to keep on falling, right? Nice and easy, right? That didn't take any effort. One line of code, right? To make it fall forever. And if I want to go to the scene to see what's happening, it's actually rotating it. Now this is rotating it in the simulator, so that's why it's kind of lagging behind. But for the most part, this is what it does, right? All right, cool. Now I want my sword to start off in different positions, randomly. I want my sword to start off in different X positions. From, upper bounds and lower bounds, you know what? Left bounds and right bounds, right? We want to have those two things as well. We can set that up as well inside of our script, right? So if I go back to lower bounds and upper bounds and lower bound, I can say public float left bounds. And we don't know what that number is right now. I'm guessing it's something like 3 dot something, 3 dot x, 3 dot f, let's say. And public float right bounds. The right boundary basically is what we're talking about, right? Which is, and if it's left, it must be minus. And if it's right, it must be plus. For the middle, the 0, 0 point is in the middle. Let's see if we just can do some coordination here. So we're going to click on the object. And what I want to do is I want to do something like this, right? So I want to do from the left, which looks to me like minus 2.35, to the right, which I want it to always appear on screen, my sword, right? Which is, again, 2.3. If I go 2.3 a little bit to the right, maybe a little bit 2.35 would work too. So 2.35 on each side. So not quite exactly what I look for. Notice that I have my values already, just by making them public and saving the script. Okay, so going back, roughly 2.35 minus 2.35 and 2.35. Why am I marking these in? Because I'm going to do a random value, right? All right, cool. So what I want to do is every reset, I want to change the position of my object, right? So that's right here. Instead of being 0.0f, I want this number to be random. So we're going to say something like this. We know the value is going to be a float, right? So I'm going to say float. And we're going to call it random x, which is equal to math f, that's the math function in Unity, dot. And again, what I want is a random, right? But I want the range, a random range, right? And actually, we can do kind of random range, right? That's what I want to do. I want to kind of random range between one and another. And if you look at the Unity function for random range, right? So Unity random range, right? Just to give you a scripting example, random.range. And I'll give you a nice little script example of how it works. It looks like this, random.range, right, from to. Nice. I like it. Let's put it in, right? It's equal to random.range from lower bounds, or actually left bounds, to this dot right bounds. So that's the random x value. Then I'm going to sub in the random x value in here. So random x. Random x. There we go. Okay, so we're going to go from minus 235 to positive 235. And we're going to, every frame, every time it resets, it's going to appear, the sword is going to appear at different positions on the screen. Every time it resets, over and over again. All right, let's see how this works. Sorry, I meant to go here and play. And if it works, we're going to see the sword is going to start at different places. Oh, man, what the heck? What happened? How come it didn't reset, right? And how come this still shows left bounds and right bounds? Well, did I save my script, right? That's the number one thing. And also, my random x, random range, right, that I'm putting in, my left bounds and right bounds, right, minus 235 and 235, right? I want this random value, random range, this dot left bounds and this dot right bounds to work, right? The way to check that this is true is if you click on the script inside the code, and if you don't see that code in there, like up here, then you know it's not going to work. And also my black sword, notice that these values at -3, that kind of bugs me. -3, -3. Because it should be minus 2.35, right? 2.35 and 2.35. Random values, let's try that out again. Oh man, what the heck? How come it's not working? So if you want to debug, let's take a look. How do I debug? I want to change every reset. Every time reset's called, which happens pretty much once it hits the lower bounds, right? I want to see what that floating point number is. So I can do something like this. I can say debug.log. Here's your debugging. Oops, debug.log, and put in random x, right? So you can check to see what that is. So save, go back out. Now it's going to appear in your console. Here, let's try this out. It also will appear down here if there's anything. So minus 0.2, 2.33, but you know it's changing, right? But my x value seems to be fixed at 0. Is there somewhere else where I'm setting this up at 0? Because one will override the other one. And if you look at the console, you can see that the numbers keep changing. 2, minus 0.5, 2.1. So the random number generator is working. That's good. But somehow, the effect isn't it's not taking effect at all. Let's go and take a look why. So if you look at my script down here, right, what am I doing? That's no good, right? That's where it's being reset to 0. So it doesn't matter where this starts off. I can set it wherever I want up here. But what I want to do down here is kind of whatever the position was before, I want it to be down here. So I want to kind of say the current position, current y, like we did before. So var current x, right, is equal to this dot game object dot transform dot position. By the way, there's a lot, like I said, a lot faster way of doing it. Dot x, and we're going to just put this in here, just to make it clear. So current x. Now it's going to work, right? Because now not only is it going to take the position, but it's not going to reset it to somewhere else. So now it's going to just work at different places. Yay! I got sword. Right? Not exciting. Here's where it gets exciting. I want to make 2 more swords like this. And instead of me doing all this work again, right? That doesn't make any sense. I've already done all my work. I'm going to take my black sword, right? Go into my prefabs folder and drag and drop it in. Now my sword is, quote unquote, a prefab, which means I can drop in as many black swords as I want, right? And when I run it, I'm going to instantiate 3 black swords that randomly will appear in different places. Now notice they all appear proportionately with each other, right? And this is a problem. Now it's starting to get some variation, but this is a problem because they appear to be almost on top of each other half the time, right? It's almost like they've got the same random number of values, right? And it's because of our black sword, what we reset these things to, right? Remember, the range is going to be between minus 0.235 and 235. That's what's happening. But we don't know, the problem with this is we don't know which black sword is where. It looks like they're just spinning together, but actually it's not really happening. What's really happening is they're just interchanging, and we just can't tell which one's going where, right? To modify this so we know which one is which, just to show you that there's a lot more variation than you think, right? If I go back into my black sword option here, I want to add a way of modifying this texture, right? So notice that my default sprite is right here, right? But what I want to do is I want to change my sprite's color. Here's my sprite's color right here, right, by default. So let's make my original sword black. This sword I'm going to make red, right? And the third sword I'm going to make green, just to make it so that it is extreme. I'm also going to separate them. So here's my green sword. There's my red sword and my black sword, right? It doesn't really matter where these are right now. But when I press play, you'll see the variations, right? So here's my green, and here's my green and black. And then you see that they're on top of each other, and they're right on top of each other there. But they're also spinning at the same rate. You know what? I want to give some variation with the spin so that they look a little bit more, a little different, which means I need a random value, right, from my spin rate, which means I'm going to expose that on the inspector again by putting in public float. We'll call this the random angle, right? Which we're going to go, remember, my angle is 5, like how much I changed. My random rotation maybe is what this is going to be, rotation, which is going to be, let's say, instead of 5, we'll make it up to 10. 10.0f. Cool, okay. So here's my rotation, right? And what I want to do is this random rotation is what's going to go here, right? But it's going to be a random range, right? So every frame, well, we don't want to do it here. Undo, undo, undo. What I want to do is I want to create another way, because my random rotation is this, but I want to, every time I reset, I want to randomly change the angle. So we'll say the random x angle, or random z angle, if you will. So we'll say the, and this will be a private number. So it's private. So we'll make it a float. And the random z angle, right? We're going to set that off to 0.0f for now. So initialize it. And inside my reset, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same idea with my random z angle, right? So I'm going to do this random range idea, right? I don't need this thing here. What I can do is do one of these, right? So I'm going to say on reset, this dot random z angle is equal to a random range between 0.0f, which is the, actually I could do, if I really want to, between -10 and +10, right? So between negative random rotation, right, and random rotation. What does this mean? It means it can go left or right, depending on how many angles. Maybe it's going to spin this way a little bit. Maybe it's going to really spin fast. The other ones will spin at different rates. So that's what this random z angle is, right? But once I set it, for the entire time it's falling down the screen, I want this dot random z angle to be the one that I use when I transform and rotate everything around. Can you guys see this okay? If it's too small, I can make it bigger. Where the hell is it? Tools. I thought it was here. Yeah. I'm just going to take this. I'm just going to change the font size to make it bigger. So we're going to go to mono 18. I don't know if that's, is that better for you? Maybe even bigger. So preferences, make that even bigger than that. So fonts, we'll make that 20, 22. There we go. Massive. There we go. How's that? Is that better? So all I'm doing is changing the random z angle right here. That's what I'm doing, right? And I'm doing that every time I reset. So every time I reset the screen, it's going to change the speed of my rotation. That's what's happening. All right, let's check this out and see what happens now, right? So, woohoo! So some swords that are faster, some swords that are slower. We're going to have some difference in variation, right? Some swords that spin out of the way, right? You can see how it looks, you know, a little bit more random. But you know what I still don't have as random? The falling rate. They all come down at 0.5, every one of them, right? And that's the max speed, 0.2. If I was to change this max speed, by the way, if I went to 0.3, you can see that they come a lot faster, right? And some of them might even appear to fall faster than others. It kind of gives a little bit of variation, right, to some of them. And that's what I want to do. I want to change the speed so that my max speed is not 0.3 anymore. Whatever my max speed is, I want to make it so it's the maximum speed is 0.3, right, here in the code, in the inspector. But in here, what I want it to do is whatever the max speed is, I want a random number between, you know, 0.2 and 0.3. I don't want a lot of variation here because if I make it too slow, it's going to like be really easy. Okay, how about that? 0.1 and 0.3. How about that? Just to give a random number. So you can see where I'm going to go next, right? So my transform, my upper bounds, this dot upper bounds is my reset, right? This is my random x, and I'm going to reset here. Here's my random x. Here's my random z angle, right? And oh man, I have somewhere in here where I have my max speed. This is my new location. So I don't want this, right? I want my max speed to be something else. I want to say my dy component, right? So just like I did before, I'm going to say my private float, my change in y, as an example, is going to be 0.0f. And what I want to do here is inside my reset, I want to change my random, my dy. So this is what this is going to be, right? I want to modify my dy randomly. So I'm going to say something like this. This dot dy is equal to random dot range, right? From, again, my, something like 0.1, right? F all the way to my maximum speed, right? Which is what I want to do. Now I'm putting a lower bound of a minimum speed. I can also make that minimum speed. Oh boy, now we're getting crazy, right? Public float min speed. They're making it 0.1. And then we'll say min speed, max speed, right? More control for the user, good. That's what this is. We're giving you, if I made this for you, my little prefab, I'm giving you control to align it. If I was the tools creator, right? All right, cool. So that means I have a max speed and a min speed. There it is, my 0.1, 0.3. And if I run it now, I should see a lot more variation in terms of speed, right? Some of them that fall faster, some of them that fall slower. It appears that the swords are all over the place, different speeds, different angles. Some of them spin to the right, some of them spin to the left, right? What do you think? That didn't take a lot of work, right? Really. I'm just playing with the numbers. Of course, the other thing we can do is make it so that they drift to the right and to the left, right? For more variation, it comes right at you diagonally and to the other side diagonally. Like there's lots of stuff we can do. Why am I showing you this stuff? Because once you know how to do this stuff, you can do any animation or any kind of movement across a two-dimensional screen. The other thing I got to show you before next week is the ability for you to create buttons. I want to make a button on the screen. Remember, this is part of the canvas, right? So when I add a button, first I want to add, it's going to be a UI element that I'm adding in, right? So for example, let's say I want to make a reset button that resets these things. It calls the reset function. Every time I click the button, it resets everything up to the top of the screen, right? But the reset button is always going to appear on top. And we'll end with this one, okay? So what I want to do is I want to add a new button. So I want to add a new UI element. I'm in the hierarchy to do this. UI element, button. Okay, cool. Now it appears way over here, right? But my button is totally off screen, which is not what I want. I want it over here. And again, if you think about the canvas is a representation of what it looks like on the screen. If I was to look at the game now, you can see that the button would appear on the screen, right? I'm pressing F to zoom in on the button so you can see the button. If I don't want this button to be this big, I can modify it. I can modify the size of the button, right? By dragging and dropping the size. My bounding box is an example. This is the hit box. That's what this thing is. My anchors, my pivot. Is that like rain? That's crazy. That's nutty, right? Here's the scale of my button, 111. I can certainly scale it to be half the size if I want. Across the x-axis, I can make it 0.5. That's the actual my button itself, the actual text of my button. If I click on this thing, though, I can see that the size, here's my width, 160 pixels. I can also change this to something smaller, like maybe 120 pixels, I can change the color of my button. Let's make it, because it's a blue background, we'll make it yellow. And we'll make the text size a different color, right? So if I click on the text of my button right now, it's black. I can change this to yellow or white. Let's make it white. So RGB. There we go, white or black or some other weird color in between. Doesn't have to be pure black. There we go. Maybe that kind of a blue color. We can also make it transparent. So notice I can make it black. Let's make it black by default. So whoop, black. And then I can, if I change the transparency, I can just turn off the transparency. I can make it either fully opaque or fully transparent, depending on what I want. Button. The button text, instead of it saying button itself, notice that there are two components to the button. There's the canvas component, which is what's showing right now. There's the button itself, which is the actual shape of the button. And if I click on text, that is the actual text of the button itself, the object. And in here where it says button, I can change this text to say whatever I want. Reset. I can also change the size of my font by making this something bigger. Let's say, for example, 20. I can also make this bold or whatever I want. There's my reset button. But the trick is, my button itself has to somehow connect to a script, right? That's what I wanted to do. So when I click the button, it's got to connect somehow to a script. So notice on the bottom, there is this on-click event. Here's the on-click event on the button itself, not the text of the button, but the button itself. There's this little area that says on-click. If I click onto it, you can see that in runtime, right? I don't have anything that I'm attached to, but I could attach it to a specific object if I want to. Actually, what I need to do is I need to connect it to my script, right? That's what I need to do, right? I need to connect it to some kind of script, because otherwise this little button here has no context, right? This little button here. So if I clicked onto it, you can see that right now all it says is runtime only, editor and runtime, and then my objects, I have nothing that my button is running on right now. And I can choose, if I click on this little target, I can choose what my target is of my button. For example, my black sword, right? If I choose my black sword and go away, now you can see that I can choose the function that's linked to my black sword, right? My black sword controller, right? Here's my black sword controller. And I can enable this thing, right? I can look at a function that does something. I want to enable a function down here. Now, guess what? My function is private. So I need to change my script on my sword, which is this script, so that my reset method, which is this method right here, I need to make this public. And I might as well refactor this thing so it is reset, right? Now when I come back, if I saved everything, click away and click back, and I click down here, I can actually look at my black sword controller, and I can see the reset method, and I want to trigger the reset method every time I click the button. Now guess what? This works for my prefab, right? My prefab. But will it work for the ones that I've put in here? Will it reset them all? Will it reset only some of them? Will it even work? And if I click the button, you can see that I'm resetting one of them. Take a look, woo, right? Only one. But not all of them. I want all of them to be reset. See how I'm doing that? Clicking one and the black sword gets reset, but not the other ones. Why is that? Because these two, although they're instances of the black sword prefab, right? I'm just putting it out there to you guys, right? They've changed, right? I modified them. I've added color to them all, right? I made one red and one blue, one green, and that has changed it from a prefab to another thing altogether. It's actually made from that prefab, but it's not. It's an instance of the object with different properties, which doesn't work this way. If I had them all instances of the prefab, then they would all reset. But because they're different, they're slightly different, it doesn't reset the ones that I've changed, only the ones that are the prefab. And the good example of this is if I bring another black sword into play. Right, so I got two black swords now. And if I was to do that, now again, it's going to get really messy here, right? A bunch of black swords. But if I click reset, right? Well, wait a minute. I have more than one black sword. How come the other black sword doesn't get reset? Because again, I based it off that one instance. Let me show you one more time. So here's my black, here's my sword, and what I've done is I point to a sword. If I look at the prefab itself and point, kind of drag and drop it in, that's the prefab now that I'm looking at. And if I press play, and I try this again, now you can see that none of them reset. I'm only specifying one of them. Can I reset them all? Sure. But I have to do something else in the code. In this case, if I only just drag the first one, then only that object will be reset. That black sword, this one here. If I drag this one in here, right? That's a different target than the other one, right? I was to run that again. And notice that, did I change anything? Oh yeah, I have to select the function. Let's try that again. So I got to reset the function, go back to my black sword script, and go to the reset, and then try it again, and then we're done for the day. Click the reset button, and you can see nothing happens, because even though this script has been reset, it's attaching to the prefab, but not these ones, right? But if I go and drag and drop my actual black sword that's here, and put it over here, now this resets, and I can again go back to my black sword controller and click the reset function, and from here it should work now with that one sword. Yeah, see how it's happening? Questions around buttons? We did a button. We did because you need buttons. If you can't make buttons work, then you can't make your slot machine work, right? And in fact, if you use the button that I gave you from the slot machine as a example, right? And if you look at it, I just need to know, you need to know where to look at to create your click event. If you don't know where to create that, that might pose an issue for you. But if you were to search how to do buttons in Unity online, oh my gosh, there's like 1,000,001, videos on how to do that. All right, so to revamp, next week, just please remember there is no exam. So unless somehow there's a catastrophe and you need me here, or if a lot of you ask me for help or something like that, then I won't be here. If you do need me individually, you can certainly set up a Google Hangouts call with me. So we can do that. But remember, so next week, all I want you to do is hand in your assignment 5 by Monday at midnight. You have it Monday at midnight to hand it in, okay? Any questions around that? Otherwise, guys, thank you so much. See you at the break, at the end of class. Thank you so much. I'll see you next, or I won't see you next week. Good luck on everything. If I don't see you, and maybe we'll see each other in next semester or the semester after. All right, take care. You think you do? All right, thanks.